It was Navy first,
Navy first, okay.
but I did not pass the test for pilot, only for navigator. And I wanted to be a pilot, and the Marine recruiter came on campus the next year and said, I said, look, I did this. He said, well, you can take the test again. If it's been 12 months, you can retake the test. And you can be a Marine too. I said, what a deal. And so I took the test. I went to Memphis again, took the test, qualified as pilot.
Yeah.
And then I had met the Marine up close and personal. He's a Marine captain, and they're very persuasive. They're very good at marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a Marine.
Yeah.
I flew the H-46 Boeing Vertol, had tandem rotors. We said tandem rotor, dual motor. It was 10,000 nuts and bolts flying in close formation. It was a transport. It was an all-mission aircraft. The Army lost like 4,000 Hueys.
Yeah, that's something.
The Marines lost probably 800 to 1,000 46s.
Good grief.
So we were the ones that were kind of like, if you needed to go, we were the ones going to take
We're
you.
the ones.
And we're going to bring you home. I graduated in May '67, and I showed up at Quantico, Virginia in September of '67, 3 months later.
So September '67, and when did you arrive in country in Vietnam?
August of '69.
August of '69. What's the first memory you have of, the first
Of landing at Da Nang.
landing at Da Nang?
It's really hot and humid here.
I hear there a lot from that. It's the first thing you step off, and it's like, the heat and the humidity.
And there was a scent or an odor in the air that's very common in Asia of cooking rice bowls and cities that are streets that are very busy, sanitation systems not very well developed, and so it's all together, and you go, oh yeah, I guess we're not home anymore. Well, we were fortunate enough to be out of the country for about 2 months. The carrier took us back to Okinawa. We had all A-model aircraft, and they would not support themselves in the air with an engine out, and that would happen every once in a while, and you were going down. Mm-hmm. These are all full of patches from bullet holes. They were the early series from the 64, 65 area when they were new. So our squadron was taken to Okinawa and said, we're going to give you all new D models of the H-46. So part of it was checking out on that model, but also we got to volunteer for assignments to go to Japan to the rebuild facility. The Japanese rebuilt H-46s in Atsugi, outside of Tokyo.
This was a cruise then to...
This was a cross-country flight from Okinawa up through the island chain. These are actually two crews. There's another aircraft. They stripped all the radios out, everything they could strip out that was useful was. So one aircraft had one navigation radio and the other one had one communication radio. And so one did the communicating for both, the other did the navigation. So, and this was landing in the Marine base in Iwakuni, actually in Japan. We still had a long flight across where we went by Fujiyama. Mount Fujiyama was there, full of snow, on a very high mountain. It was a great, it was just a great, it was not R&R, but it was a great break. Instead of taking R&R, I brought Carol over to Okinawa, so we had 4 to 5 weeks together instead of just 5 days.
Was it tough to go back to Vietnam after such a long time in a pretty peaceful environment?
Well, yes, but you knew you had a job to do. I was the maintenance officer again, junior maintenance officer. We had a major who was the maintenance officer, but I got an opportunity to fly the aircraft more to make sure the systems were all ready to go. The ship took time to resupply fuel, food, and everything. So it wasn't like you were just taken out. It was just another part of of what you needed to do.
I got you. What about this photo here? What's the background there?
Well, I was aboard ship for 6 months of the tour. Our squadron was. The 26 Marines were on board. There was also a medical bay on board, a small, the word escapes me, it'll come to me. But when they had a mission, our job was to go when other groups were surrounded, well under fire, and be able to put in, we had No, we had 18 46s. We could launch 12 or 13 at any one time, which means we could put the whole battalion ashore if it needed to.
How many Marines would that be?
400 or 500. But
Wow.
most missions would be like 4 choppers with 50.
Yeah.
And then we would get a call and say, hey, we're up here, it's not going very well, we think we might get overrun. Or we have more medevacs than the land-based 46s could do. Could you help us there? So we were kind of the, when things, the 26 Marines had the worst luck I've ever seen. They always got surrounded.
Really?
And
surrounded by enemy.
Well, they always were inserted into those situations, and our job was that was our job to support. We wore our life vest over the water, and then when we went feet dry, we put on our bullet bouncers.
So feet dry meaning now you're...
Feet dry, you're on the land,
Yeah.
your ships are going back, your planes are going back, you never go alone, you're always in at least 2, sometimes 4, that's called, 2 is called a section, 4 is called a flight, and more is called a division. And so the lead pilot would always call feet wet, that meant you were back across the shore. Then flight control knew, like our ATCs here, they plotted at us on radar. They knew you were over water and going away from it. If you were feet dry, you knew you were coming in, so they had to coordinate artillery or advance that to the forward air controllers that were in the zone. A FAC, or forward air controller, was also a pilot, and they actually served on the ground with the Marines. And some lost their lives in non-aviation incidents. Their job was to call in fire, be able to talk to us coming in. Not always were they there, but when they were, they could talk airplane and weather, and it was nice to have them there. So.
Wow. As you were speaking of, feet wet, feet dry, when you go from feet wet, that is, you're over, you're in the South China Sea, now your feet dry, now you're in getting close to VC country.
Sure.
Did your disposition change at all? I mean, was that kind of a border?
Well, it was a time when you knew you were within 15 to 20 minutes of either an insertion or an extraction, or the medevac, or resupply. Actually, the resupply missions, you were empty coming in and went to a place to pick up the supplies and take them. But if you had Marines on board and you knew what the mission was, pilots together talking can cover a large range of subjects. When we were over the water, either going home or coming back, it was kind of like Cars, or what's the Clint Eastwood movie tonight, at the mess. And as soon as you went feet dry, both guys, I didn't think about it till later, but you just kind of went kind of like this, and you kind of got up here on the controls, and you started looking out. And you didn't say anything anymore. No one said don't talk anymore. No one said I'm not going to talk anymore. You just kind of were there.
Feet dry means business.
Feet dry means we're going into the mission, and here we are. Let's do the best we can. Insert means you're taking troops in. It means they're either going in for the first time, or they're being in to reinforce what's already there, or they're being dropped on a zone where they're going to go on patrols. So an insert means you're taking people in.
Yeah, and then extract is the opposite.
You have to know a little Latin to get the X part, because for Marines the in part is understandable. The extract may come later, but that means you're going in and picking them up. It can be different from a medevac, and a medevac is a subset of extracts. But an extract means you're picking up a patrol or part of a platoon or 3 or 4 helicopters going and bringing people out and getting them out of there. Or moving them to the next place, or whatever. And so you have different strategies flight-wise of how you line up and how you get in and how you get out. And that's all covered in training, in that 4 months time back in the States.
Now, did sometimes what so far as you know, it's an insert, but when you arrived, did it sometimes turn into a medevac?
Oh yes, that would happen. And it depended where you were. You could be the first flight in, or you could be the second division in. And the first one in got to kind of feel things out. He would be on the radio and saying, hey, it's quiet here, all's well, and they would take off, and then you'd come in, maybe you'd take off. Maybe they're waiting for the last group. Or you were going in and it was a firefight that we never would knowingly fly into a zone where you knew you were going to get hosed. That's just kind of common sense.
Right.
But you got hosed because the positions would get overrun. Situation would change from the time that you were feet dry until you got into the zone. And so if you had several helicopters, it was easy to get a medevac out because there was a lot of activity doing that.
Yeah.
If there's only one or two and you came under fire, you would leave. They would either call in artillery or close air, or they would beat back the opposition from on the ground and clear it so you could get back.
Sure.
So the number of times you actually took hits was probably less than 15 or 20%, but you were in that environment all the time.
Now you mentioned you've mentioned to me that about 500 missions in a 13-month tour. In any of those missions, was your helicopter disabled?
No.
Okay.
No, it took hits. If you want to know what it sounds like someone described it as hearing from the crew chief in the back of fire going out like popcorn. But if you started hearing pinging in your earphones, that means you were taking hits.
I see.
So it would be kind of a ping, ping, ping. The job of the crew chief when he got home, we usually had two crew chiefs. One's a mechanic and a specialty either in hydraulics or whatever. The other was a gunner.
Right.
And both crew chiefs' job when they were to get home, if they weren't a metalsmith, they would call it and you put patches over for your next flight. So.
Did you have any incidents where your helo's not disabled, but you're in the air heading back to the ship, and it's kind of a question mark whether we're going to make it or not? I mean,
no, there was none of those. We had mechanical problems, but I had an engine failure at one point on a maintenance test flight at the carrier.
Yeah. And
was ordered into the water by the air boss because they had on the spots there were other planes that were going to launch, and so we prepared, which means that you had a less than 50% probability of getting out because leave it to the Marines, but Boeing had put in plugs you could drain water out of in case you take water.
Really?
Wow. Well, it rained so much in Vietnam that the plugs were just removed. And so it meant you didn't have to worry about after a rainstorm to pick up and go. They had more weight. But if you lost
the plugs removed just
from the belly of the aircraft.
Just so that the water would just
go out.
So
the water would just go out immediately. So you never had to worry about how much weight do I have in water, or did the crew chief remember to pull that plug?
Right, okay.
And it was obviously not good for the ops manual. However, it worked well when you're on shore, but on the boat, then if your plugs were out, it meant the aircraft, wouldn't float a lot.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't go down quickly, but it would be going down, and you have blades turning, and you're going to turn it over on the left side, go out the other side. Pilot's waiting for last because you want to get your Marines out. So that was all going through my mind. And I had a friend on the aft spot who was just barely turning up and heard the Mayday call, and he shut down and motioned to the Navy crewmen, pull me off the spot. And so as they were pulling off, I brought the aircraft over the bow of the ship with the last power that I had, just before the generators went off the line, just before the hydraulic pumps went off the line, which meant you became a flying rock, and it set down.
So you didn't have to put it in the water then?
Didn't have to put it in. So there were a lot of things going on. You have mechanical, you have weather, you have the enemy, you have pilot judgments. All are stacked not in your favor.
A lot of accidents. I mean, war zones are dangerous because of the combat, but then you have so many accidents. And,
most people don't realize that. Almost a quarter of the accidents were pilot error, and that doesn't mean they were negligent. It just meant that exhausted, weather, darkness, trying to get back, and would run into a mountain. Two Cobra pilots. One was a flight school comrade of mine. We knew each other that way. And they came back to Marble Mountain after a mission feeling very elated, and they they did a break. A break is kind of like an air show thing where you break one way and the other guy follows you, come around and land.
Yeah.
They broke into each other.
Oh gosh.
And 4 Marines died. 2 Cobras were destroyed, just fell right there onto a Marble Mountain runway. We had gunners on board.
On board, yeah.
Our 50 caliber machine guns were defensive, not offensive.
Yeah.
That was Huey gunships and so forth, but we did, there were times when our gunners
Sure.
had to kill in the zone
Right.
in order to suppress fire so we could get out.
Yeah.
And so it's just something you see, and you are covered up with the activity at the time, and you think about it a little bit when you get back home and in your hooch, and then it goes away and you go on the next day. Marines would come on to dead NVA soldiers, and they would take their personal effects from them, and they'd find diaries, pictures of the wives, last letter written from home, and then you realize war is terrible.
Yeah.
War is futile.
Yeah.
So there's those thoughts, but you still had your job to do. You're not going home, so get ready for tomorrow. We were college graduates. We were idealistic. We were well-trained, and we were going out to do something good.
Yeah.
And war is a terrible leveler of innocence. It took only weeks to realize we're involved in a place that we shouldn't be, and in a war that we could not win. The only time the war came back in focus, I was flying from Pontianak in West Kalimantan up to Kuching. Kuching is Indonesian and Malayan word for cat. I named the city Kuching, Malaysia, but I was flying an MK. She was a 16-year-old student going back to the Philippines.
Missionary kid.
Yeah, doctor's daughter, and going back, and left her. I made sure she got on her connecting flight to the Philippines, and I got in my aircraft to fly home. Well, we had low-frequency navigation, they call ADF, automatic direction finding, but it also could tune into radio stations. It was the same frequency bands. And it was April 29th, 1975, and I listened to the fall of Saigon on the radio at 6,000 feet over Indonesia. And I just sat there, and again, it was another thing of posture, but I just sat there, had the earphones on, and I listened. And I listened as they were reporting on the helicopters leaving, and then the NVA Army coming through the gates of the embassy.
Yeah.
And I just kind of sat there and went, it's over.
Wow. Just a flood of memories. I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
and it's finally over.
Yeah.
And my squadron, the squadron I served in, HMM 164, one of the main squadrons, and pulled the last Marines off of the embassy.
Yeah.
Story there, those pilots flew 18 hours
Yeah.
that day. They just stopped for refueling. They would pass sandwiches up into the cockpit and just keep going. And they were trying to take everybody off, a lot of Vietnamese, but made sure all the embassy, and there were 6 Marines on the embassy roof providing protection and providing cover for the entrance.
Yeah.
And that aircraft took off and landed, got rid of its load out at the ship, and started on its way back. And a radio call came and said, that's it, we've got everybody, we're done. Came from a 3-star general out on a ship somewhere. And the pilot called back and said, there are 6 Marines still.
Wow. Yeah. And so somebody went back and got those Marines out. Or how did that story go?
Well, the air boss said, we have our orders, you need to come back. And but the squadron commander came up and said, Semper Fi, Marine.
Wow. Yeah.
And the Marine captain knew what that meant. And go back. And he did.
He went back and got them.
And the 6 Marines were there. And it got really quiet. And no choppers were coming back. And they said,
Wow.
are we going to be left here? And they could hear the tanks coming down the road where they were going to bust into the gate.
But they did get out.
That helicopter from HM-164 landed on top, grabbed those Marines, and got out, knowing they might face a court-martial when he got back. But by the time he got back, the squadron commander, the air boss, and the captain of the carrier all got together, and they said, we approve that. Send that back to the 3-star. That shows you we'd line up 3 or 4 and launch them at the same time. It's not, they're not turning and launching, but you can see the rest of the squadron is there. You can see the blades fold so that you can be aboard ship. There's a switch when you get into the cockpit that you push, and then the blades all come out, and then the pins lock, and the crew chief has to go up and make sure each lock pin has gone in there. He's also checking for leaks and hydraulics and so forth before he shuts it up. But we're getting ready. We start to turn, and then the troops come out and get into each chopper. Then the tower, it's like a control tower at any airfield. It's called Air Boss is up there, and you're looking for permission to take off and land. And
so this is a helo carrier.
It's a LPH. It's called the Landing Platform Helicopter Carrier. It's straight. You know, the jet ones are angled and have wires. We obviously don't, because we can hover in. And the carrier will always turn into the wind, and because it gives you your best wind across, best stability. Sometimes you're landing on a rainy night and a pitchy dark night. That's always a challenge.
Wow.
But most of your day hops are in fairly good weather.
And how far out would the ship be anchored?
Oh, 10 miles.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, away from fire, away from. You know, it was a safe enough distance, but close enough you could get in. Yeah, at 120 knots, that meant you're only 5 minutes off the. Then it might cruise out further with circles, you know, that kind of thing. So you might have 15 minutes, and then it's another 15 minutes.
Oh, that's right. If the helos are going up, the ship is probably underway.
Underway.
Right? You need the wind.
Or it could be moving. We would launch from one place, and we'd go back home at another, because they'd gone up the coast and launched 4 more. They might be 40 miles away by the time you got home that night. And you always worked the Marine bases for fuel. You never went back to the ship. So it was kind of like a flying airport, and then you did your work and then came home at night. Yeah.
And then what's the story behind this photo?
Well, the story is brief. It was a helo that was shot down and brought back by a H-53 Jolly Green. I'm not sure there are many parts left, but you always take a chopper out of the zone so that the enemy can't go and get the technology, or not that it was that high tech, but get frequencies from the radios, get maps, that kind of thing. And there were some parts there that probably could be useful. The pilot, the co-pilot was killed. The pilot survived, and the crew chief was killed because, you know, in the back it lost its aft section of the aircraft. So,
grief.
Yeah,
that is something.
That's what it looks like when gravity takes over.
You have vets who come home, like for example the one I just mentioned, who it sounds like he was kind of isolated and had a very small world, and he's drinking a lot, and he's hanging around with other angry people and protesting, and Vietnam Veterans Against the War, etc. Whereas when you are done with when you come back to the States, you're helping others to train, then you become a missionary, which involves helping other people. That must have been, looking back, does that seem like, you know, that was a really good thing, because the focus isn't so much on me, on how I feel. You've got your family, you're helping other people in your work. Do you think, looking back, that was really important?
Well, I think it's important because you realize slowly over time that life is not about me. It's about others. And stories come up, and as you saw, there's emotions that come up. But the overarching umbrella is that God is with us. And there's a purpose for everything. We tend to think if things happen and we don't understand, or doesn't seem fair, or somebody hurt us, we focus on that particular event and lose the big picture.
You know, you've indicated in a different discussion, you said that in your view, we should not have been in Vietnam. That the war didn't make sense. The way it's prosecuted didn't make sense. Is that, if you could, would you erase that year in Vietnam from your own life story?
No, no, I would do it again.
You
I mean,
would?
not that you want to go back and do it again, but I'm saying it produced a foundation of understanding. It developed my leadership skills tremendously at a young age. It set the track for everything I've done since. And most people would say Marines are a little hard to live with, and I wear that badge with an honor. Not everybody you meet is your friend, but you're giving yourself to the mission that God's given you, the work that's put in front of you. You want to do it to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
I would do it again.
Really?
I would do it again. I believe my role was to honor the country. Now, again, we found out that what was on the menu was not the meal that was served. And so once you could adjust to that, then you found other ways. And when you give yourself to protecting the lives of others, I mean, my whole job was to make sure Marines were safe, had what they needed. It was a whole focus. And war is terrible. It is hell, as close to hell that we can get, I think. When you see scorched landscaping, broken bodies, total destruction that man can can bring upon another person. There's an understanding that comes with that. The other thing I've done that I've been very intentional about is when I'm in Washington, D.C., and I go probably once every 12 or 18 months, I always go to the wall.
Sure.
I always put my fingers on 12 names. There's others I could, but those 12.
Yeah.
And somebody said, why do you do that? And I said, well, first of all, it's out of respect.
Yeah.
It's a life they never had the opportunity to live that I did.
Yeah.
And it's to remember. It's just to remember. My last trip, we were there in March, and two former Marine captain docents were there. We didn't know they were just docents until they introduced themselves. And they said, well, could we help you find a name? I said, well, I already know the first name I'm going to because I visit all the time. Well, let us go with you. And so we went up and touched the name of Richard Dodd and told his story. And they told their stories of two other names that were nearby.
Yeah.
And we just stood there. And we just went, there's a healing that goes on. There's a camaraderie of experiences shared. There's a deeper appreciation for our country and the blessings we have of being Americans. But there's a deep knowledge that says also war is terrible. First Lieutenant Richard Dodd, United States Marine Corps. My roommate in flight school in Pensacola for 9 months, married an Army widow, husband was lost in Vietnam, with one child, was lost in the last 30 days of his tour and was listed as MIA for several years and was never recovered. After taking major hits to his Huey helicopter and going down in triple canopy jungle. His last radio call as he was going down was in response to a call. How are you doing? His reply, I'm a little busy right now. I will get back to you. And there didn't seem to be a way to know why was Dick taken and why was I not taken. Dick was from Iowa, graduated from a Lutheran college. We roomed together at Softly. You'll see the aircraft behind, the T-34. That's the first trainer that you have in becoming a pilot. And Dick was very good a pilot, as much as we could be with just the primary behind us.
Yeah.
We had a whole bunch of, another year of flying in different aircraft and qualifying and going to Vietnam before that was over. But he was Go ahead.
Did you find out that he was killed when you were in country?
We did, yes. He was actually a month ahead of me, so his last month in country was during my last 2 months. And so word would go through the pilot community, even though he was a Huey pilot. Whenever a Marine pilot went down, the news went out.
So he had completed 12 months in country.
He had.
And was shot down on the 13th.
And had married an Army widow prior to going overseas. What a story.
Yeah.
What a story.
So one of the things that you notice about the world of war is that, you know, you form these very strong bonds with your comrades, but at the same time, in a way, you kind of have to be able to let them go in order to carry on. What was it like for you? This was your friend. You got word. Richard didn't make it, but you had to carry on. You had your own work. Maybe you had a mission to fly 10 minutes after you found out. What was how did that work out? You get the news, but you've got to carry on.
Again, it just passes. You have a moment of sadness. You may think about it and talk. You would definitely talk about it with fellow pilots at the table.
Yeah.
But you didn't let it go to the other side where, oh, I guess I'm not going to fly tomorrow. You just need to talk to somebody about it. And your best outlet was your other pilots. And then you get back in the airplane and you go fly.
You just keep going.
You go fly. And it takes up your time, your energy, your focus. It's not like you're gritting your teeth or you're just saying, I got to push this behind me because this is really overwhelming. It's not a lack of respect. It's just you go fly.
Yeah, you've got to carry on because there are a bunch of other Marines relying on you.
Yeah. Well, he was a co-pilot, which means he was on the front 90 to 120 days of his tour. We always flew the left seat as a co-pilot, and then as pilots went home, and you would take another flight check and then become an aircraft commander. So he what was the date there? March 8th, 1970. So that was during the year I was there. He had come over a little bit later, months in the tour of my tour time. But again, when the name comes through, then you remember who he was. Other names came through too that I didn't know as well, but other pilots knew.
Sure.
And they needed to tell somebody or talk about it at the dinner table.
Yeah.
And they needed to get in an airplane the next day and go fly.